Will you pray with me? O holy and gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation on all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. For you, O God, you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So how many of you look at the book of Ruth and think, "Aw, what a great story"? Because it is a great story, right? I mean, this devotion, where you go, I'll go. Where you live, I'll live. Where you die, I'll die. Your God will be my God. I mean, it's a beautiful story. And we know that it's a very short story, so that makes it easy too. But we know at the end of the story that Ruth has a son. And this son is part of the line that leads to David, that continues on and leads to Jesus. And so we look at this story and we just kind of think, Hallmark, right? It's a wonderful story. But we don't pay a whole lot of attention to Naomi. And today we're going to spend a little bit of time with Naomi because there's parts of this story that are not sunshine and unicorns. There are parts of this story that my guess is you and I can probably connect with. So the story starts out, there's a famine. In other words, there's no food in Bethlehem, the city of bread. There's a famine. And so Naomi and her husband and her two sons decide to leave their country. I want you to think about that for a minute. What does it feel like to leave everything behind? Not only are they leaving their home, they're leaving their country. They're leaving all of their faith traditions. They're going to a foreign land. And so they do. And while they're there, the boys grow up, I guess. We don't really know how old they are when they leave. And they each marry women from that country that they're in, the country of Moab. And then one by one, the men in Naomi's family die. She loses her husband. And she loses both of her sons. And at the death of the last male in her family, she realizes, as a woman in this particular time and place, that she has nothing. And she needs to return back home. She needs to go back to Bethlehem. And she is praying that there is still a male relative there that will take care of her, because that is the way the world worked. And so she encourages her daughter-in-laws to remain, to go on back to their own families. They're in their country of birth. They're in their home. And she encourages them to go back. And one of them does. Orpah does return to her home. But it is her daughter-in-law, Ruth, who makes that beautiful declaration that, no, I'm going with you. And of course, Naomi's like, seriously, even if I had a husband right now, even if I were about to give birth to a male child, would you wait until the child grew up? No. In other words, it is hopeless to go with me. And yet Ruth insists on going. And I think, I always want to laugh at Naomi because the scripture tells us at that point she stopped talking to Ruth. Now, I don't know, maybe that was good for Ruth. Who knows? I'll just let y'all think on that. But Naomi and Ruth arrive in Bethlehem. The townspeople immediately recognize Naomi, and they are excited, and they come out to greet her. And did you hear her response? Don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara, which means bitter, because I am very bitter, because the Lord has dealt harshly with me. My life has been ruined. There is no joy in my life. There is no happiness in my life. Now, I want you to imagine for just a minute how Ruth felt at this whole but anyway, I digress. But the point is, This is not a happy woman, and she has had a very difficult and challenging life. Stop and think about losing everybody in your family except your daughter-in-laws. Stop and think about doing that in a foreign country, away from the support of family and friends, and it's pretty easy for us to understand why Naomi would be bitter. It's interesting. And again, this goes back to time and context, that of course God gets blamed for all of this. That was just simply the understanding of the day. You and I both would agree that while it sometimes feels like maybe God's out to get us, in our saner moments, we would recognize that no, God is actually working with us through this, that this is most likely something that we brought on ourselves. I was talking with a friend of mine recently. I've known this friend for many, many years. And I know that over the last at least 10 to 20 years, there has been a growing bitterness within her. And it started with headaches, right? It started with some other medical issues, and then it became bone spurs in the neck. And over time, the pain almost became intolerable. And I will tell you that it didn't take much for my friend to get upset about any circumstances. Do not cut her off in traffic. About any circumstances that may have been going on around her, whether they mattered or not. You might have called her Mara, for she was very bitter about what she had to go through. Now, I don't want you to look at anybody but me, but you're probably thinking of somebody maybe who sits right next to you who might be in a similar situation where perhaps life seems too heavy and burdensome and painful, and so perhaps the person sitting next to you might be, but don't look at him, might be somebody that you would name Mara. I'm trying not to look at any of you. Anyway, the thing is, you and I can get so caught up in what is happening in our lives that it absolutely impacts our whole attitude and outlook. I believe it was Shakespeare who said, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." And so the way we think about our circumstances, the way we think about whatever it is that we're dealing with, has a lot to do with how we view things and how we respond. It has a lot to do with our attitudes. So my friend recently had surgery. And the recovery from the surgery, I was supposed to be 2 to 3 days in the hospital, which extended to 6, so it was kind of a rough recovery from surgery. But about 2 weeks after the surgery, I'm on the phone with my friend, and she says, I don't get it. I don't know what happened. I haven't had a headache, and I've had a headache for the last 30 years, and I don't have a headache, and my neck doesn't hurt. And you know what's really strange? I'm happy. She said, there is just such a sense of joy about me. It's okay to cut me off in traffic now. Obviously, pain can have a lot to do with our outlook. When we hurt, it is hard to change the way we interact with people around us. But then as we were getting ready to get off the phone, she says, you got to tell everybody they need to change their attitude because this is so much better. I wish I'd known to do this before. And she wasn't talking about the surgery. She was talking about changing her thinking and her attitude. So in the story of Ruth, which I think is really the story of Naomi, but that's my opinion. In the story of Ruth, what happens is they do come back, and guess what? There is a male relative who's available who can redeem this family. I know that sounds very odd to us, but in this context, in this culture, at this time, widows were looking for a next of kin male to marry them, perhaps carry on the family line. We don't do that, really. I don't think. I don't want to know if we do. We're not doing that. And so they returned back, and it turns out that Boaz is still single and is about the right age, I guess, for Ruth. And so Naomi starts coaching Ruth on how to catch this man who is the one in town who could redeem them. And so Ruth does show up at his field, and she is permitted to glean. And of course, he takes notice and interest in her and sends her home with a little bit more than most of the widows were gleaning would have received. And then there's that whole scene on the threshing room floor that you can read about. I won't discuss. But it turns out that Boaz finally makes the connection, and he is ready to offer for her. But it turns out there's somebody else in town. And so they gather up, as men did in this time and place. They gather up at the city gates, and Boaz lays out what he is proposing. But he says, you have first rights here, my friend. And his friend is sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I've already got one. I don't know if I could have two. This is going to be, he's like, I'm going to let you go ahead and do this one. And so Boaz and Ruth get married, and Ruth becomes pregnant and gives birth to her son, Obed. And we hear this at the end of the story. She bears a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him. In other words, it was the women of the town who needed to point out to Naomi, girl, you got to get over this bitterness. You have a grandson. You have a gift. God has not forgotten you. God has redeemed you. Do not be called bitter anymore. As Laura was sharing with the kids, joy is the gift that God seeks to give us. God would have each one of us live lives that were filled with joy. The problem is we think too much, or maybe we don't think enough. I'll let you decide. But the challenge is, it's how we view our lives and our circumstances that determine our attitude. In other words, you get to choose. You can be bitter. You can be angry. You can hurt and be sad. Or you can choose to look around and recognize that life is a gift, that God has not forsaken or forgotten you, that God seeks to offer you blessing upon blessing upon blessing if you would but open your eyes and receive it. You can choose joy. Or you can be bitter. Again, don't look at those sitting near you or elbow them in the ribs. That probably won't bring about the response we're looking for here. It's a matter of how we view and how we think. Now, for some of us, One of the ways to change our attitude, sometimes it's about thinking, sometimes it's about reflecting, but oh my gosh, sometimes it just takes a really good song, right? So we're going to sing a really good song, and my guess is, as we're singing this, you are going to be smiling so big, you're not going to be able to stop yourself. And so my challenge to you is, see if this can't change your attitude today. Let us join our voices together as we sing, "This is the Day."
I invite you to please stand as you're able to